You know, you talk about the situations that you can escape or, security issues. And one of the main points in this story that you have to wear, this blue jacket and blue helmet and you have to look like soldier, but Russians don't care. Because, for example, in the start of this summer with colleagues of mine, we were in Kherson and we were under the huge shelling on evacuation point.
Hello and welcome to Covering Ukraine. I'm Oksana Mamchenkova, your host and the Kyiv-based coordinator for the Europe-Ukraine desk. You're listening to the 6th episode dedicated to our media hub. It gathered professional journalists for a panel discussion in Kyiv last September. Ukrainian and international journalists shared their experience and discussed new challenges, which they faced during their working in Ukraine. You just heard Stas Kozliuk, a Ukrainian freelance journalist, photographer, and sometimes fixer for foreign journalists. And this is the beginning of a conversation that raises many issues, such as security regulations, problems of access for journalists, the work of fixers, and competition between large and small media outlets, which ultimately leads to the main question, the issue of objectivity. Perhaps the most important challenge for any journalist in a war is the risk of losing his or her life. This is tackled by Roman Golovenko, a lawyer for the Institute of Mass Information.
According to data of the Institute of Mass Information, 10 journalists have been murdered or mortally wounded during their work. When they're acting as a journalist or going to working place or from working place or to some location from some location. And 13 journalists have been killed in Ukraine, not during their work, but have been killed as civilians. And practicing journalists, people whose main occupation is journalism. And about 60 persons who have died as combatants, who have been journalists in the past and were going to military and died in front lines or in the hospitals.
One challenge journalists face when covering news at the front line is they are embedded with the army and can become a target. As a Ukrainian journalist and also head of the international department and the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, Tetiana Ogarkova, who moderates this panel, asks, if a journalist is wearing the word press, does this offer protection? Stephane Siohan, correspondent for the French daily Libération, answers. He has been working in Ukraine since 2013.
I think that there are really different cases. It depends where you are working, how far you are from the front line. If you are close to Ukrainian soldiers, not close to them. If you can be identified by the opposite side, by Russian soldiers. I think that there are some situation when having a journalist patch can actually save you, can help you, because some combatants will just know that you are not a soldier. And then when it's about taking a decision about how to act with this human person in front of you, they can take the decision not to shoot on you because you're a journalist. There are some rules that you have to obey in order to be as much as possible identified as a journalist. But we now understand that there are some cases when some parties to this war, and I will name it the Russians, absolutely don't care about it. There is a case of Max. We know also cases of places where it was obvious that journalists were in these places and they've been shot at by artillery. So we understand that for some parts of the Russian military, life of journalists doesn't count. But to be really honest, I have the impression that when you as a journalist take the responsibility to go in such a place close to a front line, you enter a death zone. And no matter who you are, no matter if you're a humanitarian worker, if you are saving people, if you're a journalist, if you're a soldier, if you're a paramedic, you are entering a place where something can fall from the sky on you or next to you. And then if you have a patch or not a patch, it doesn't matter anymore. But we also need to understand that we journalists take our responsibility when we enter a place like this.
Stas Kozliuk, Ukrainian freelancer, adds,
Maybe I add only one thing, that these helmets and jackets, blue helmets and blue jackets and patches press, protect you from Ukrainian soldiers, to be honest, especially in the very first weeks, because everyone was so nervous and they can shoot you before start asking the questions. That's why you need it.
The work of Stas Kozliuk as a local fixer is risky and insecure. Hundreds of fixers currently working in Ukraine do not have legal status for most international media outlets. This often means no security, no recognition, and no guarantee of payment. Stephane Siohan again shares his personal experience of working with Ukrainian fixers for foreign media.
I have to say that most of the media who are publishing some content about this war absolutely don't care about fixers. Why? I'm working for a newspaper, Libération, which is a serious French newspaper, but French media don't have staff correspondents in Ukraine. So technically, I'm a freelancer, and I'm also working for other media in Belgium and Switzerland. They never ask me with whom I'm working. Most of the time, it happens that I work with a fixer. Most of the time, I don't work with a fixer. I go to some places. I mean, you know, I speak rather good Russian. I'm learning Ukrainian. I'm not fluent at all in Ukrainian, but I can go to some places in Eastern Ukraine, and speaking Russian is more than enough. So sometimes I go without fixers, but also sometimes when I need to work quicker, I work with a fixer. But the media I'm working for, who are commissioning my articles, absolutely don't care with whom I'm working, but also don't propose any security net for the people I'm working with, because fixers in Ukraine are more important than ever. A lot of journalists were coming to cover the early stage of the war in Donbass were specialists from Eastern Europe, and a lot of them spoke Russian and could actually work in Donbass. Of course, we needed fixers to access to some places to get quicker to the informations. But now this war is so massively covered since the full-scale invasion that a lot of reporters are coming from different parts of the world, and they are coming to Ukraine and to Eastern Europe for the first time. And they don't speak Ukrainian, they don't speak Russian, they don't know the context. So fixers have become absolutely instrumental. And me, who reads about Ukraine for 15 years, 20 years, I feel even when I read when there is a more important creative input of the fixer than from the journalist himself. And it happens very, very often. And the fixers are now at the core of the coverage of this war. But there are big problems because a lot of mass media in Europe, in America, don't count fixers in the equation. So if something happens to me, and if something happens to the fixer I'm working with, my media don't have any provision on what's going to happen to the fixer. I'm sorry, but it's like this. And I'm basically paying fixers on my own revenue. Sometimes I manage to get reimbursed as costs, not all the time. But indeed, there is for me a problem of professional relation between Ukrainian media professionals who work as fixers and international media companies.
Another big issue I'd like to discuss today, this is issue about access to territories, access for Ukrainian media and for international media.
This is Tetiana Ogarkova, Ukrainian journalist who is also in charge of international outreach at Ukrainian Crisis Media Center.
Why this is a big issue? Because during the war, it's quite clear that during the war, there's limited access to some kind of territories because of military operations. But at the same time, media, both Ukrainian and international, they need access in order to tell what is happening and not only telling this propaganda narrative. So, and we still have some issues, some complaints about some limits of access. So, Stephane, what are your takeaways from your experience about the access?
Access is the key to our work. We need to go to some places to report and tell about what's happening. So, of course, a journalist needs as much access and sources as possible. And you always try to have more than what you have. At the same time, we are operating here in geographical reality when some places which were peaceful places suddenly become death zones, as I said before. So there is a balance to find between what you need, the place where you need to go to bring your story back, and how far you should go to actually come back and not come back in a black bag. Is that if we are talking about access from both sides of the front line, the access is absolutely huge in Ukraine. And I don't think that there is the same access on the other side. The Ukrainian authorities leave a lot of access, and they have given accreditation to 15,000 media professionals since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So the access is there. It's possible to work in Ukraine, in Kyiv, and in different parts of the front lines. Now, there are some questions, because during combat actions, during operations like the counteroffensive now, it's not possible to access to places close to the zero line. And some journalists are complaining about it because there are some who actually want to go there. And especially visual journalists, people who do photographies, people who do video. And those people need to document as close as possible. And they want to get close. And it's sometimes not possible. I think that the access that journalists have in Ukraine is absolutely reasonable. There is the possibility to document this war. But I also accept as a professional that there are some places where it's impossible to go. Why? It's because if I go now in the south of Robotine as a journalist, there is a big risk that I'm not going to come back. But there is also a big risk that if I go there with some military press officers, I put the life of other people in danger and the soldiers themselves. So I accept these limitations, and that sometimes there are some places where you cannot go.
Access to work for independent journalists is also affected by unfair competition between large and small media outlets. Oksana Leuta is a fixer for French media.
For me as a fixer, the most difficult thing is when there is an official ban on the access somewhere and the very big and nice explanations by the officials why you can't go there. And I take time to explain this to my journalist team. And then in 2 days, you see the reports from there by someone else, like by bigger medias. And I personally hate this, and I don't like it.
Stephane Siohan.
The problem in Ukraine is that it's a Ukrainian problem. There are some rules, but the rules don't apply for everyone in the same way. I think it's an eternal Ukrainian problem. There are some places where media are banned, and then you find out that some big American newspapers got the authorization to go there. Because you understand that for the Ukrainian authorities or the military, yes, it's important to communicate with CNN or the New York Times because it's big audiences and you can communicate with American audiences and decision makers. But it's really a problem when you work on the ground. You are really trying to get the information. You get some bans, and then some colleagues have the access.
Cases of unacceptable behavior by journalists themselves also contribute to this, says Stas Kozliuk.
If we're talking about people on the ground, about soldiers, they prefer, I don't know about nowadays, but few months before, they prefer Ukrainians. And there is only one reason. Because Ukrainians are locals and they understand the context, they understand the rules, and they understand the situation. For example, if a press officer told you that you cannot make picture of this mortar, for example, with some trees on the background, because Russians can't understand when this mortar standing and where the position of Ukrainian soldiers standing, that's a problem, and you understand it, and you try to make a picture without some geolocation, because the problem is the soldiers' lives. Because you will arrive, you make some story, and you will gone. But soldiers will stay, and that's your response. Because if you make some stupid things, they will be injured or killed. And that's why soldiers hated journalists, especially foreigners, because, it's hard to explain why you cannot do this or that for foreigners, because they have a lot of experience with wars, on the Middle East, on Afghanistan, and they continue thinking that that's war in Ukraine the same. But that's not true, because this is the different war with different scale of aggression and different scale of using weapons. And you always have to think about security, your security and security of soldiers that give you permission and give you access to this location.
Yeah, I think that generally the journalists who come to cover this war from abroad are in majority quite professional. But I also observed some non-acceptable behaviors in terms of security.
Stephane Siohan.
In July, I was supposed to go with a colleague of mine to a stabilization point, a field hospital near the front line in Zaporizhia region. And just a few hours before going there, the access was cancelled. And actually, a team of American journalists went there on the day before and didn't switch off their geolocalization. And this stabilization point was heavily bombed and there were casualties. So we have journalists who don't respect the rules. We have journalists who publish photos on social networks right after they've been in a place.
Tetiana Ogarkova from the Ukraine Crisis Media Center.
I'll tell you another story. We also travel a lot in the frontline zone as civilians, as volunteers. And I remember, and we are traveling with our own car. And normally we have very easy access to any kind of zones because we are bringing cars for military. And it happened to us many times to have a foreigner in our car. They were looking around, our friends, they were looking around, they were taking photos, but they never published what they did, stating that normally as an international journalist, they had no right to be there. This is precisely why all what they saw, all what they filmed, even sometimes they were not filming, they were not publishing, stating that it would be against the kind of ethics of publishing what you were not allowed to film officially. So this is an important point you are making about this behavior, which are dangerous for both Ukrainian side and these journalists for their career, because if you are caught doing that, you could lose your career simply. Roman, you as a lawyer, what are your comments on that? So is there any kind of formal responsibility for filming or for publishing things, I don't know, less than 3 hours after missile strike or whatever, all these consensus things we all know, but if there is an infraction to this law, what could happen legally?
At first, you will be under investigation about whether you have some ties with Russia, or maybe you are a Russian agent. It depends. If you are a journalist, not very qualified journalist, and so on, I don't think that it will be quite criminal responsibility, but we will have problems with accreditation. It's truly. And also it depends because there is difference military targets and civilians after sharing. And in fact, if there was much discussion, much noise about this case, it may be more problematic because, all of you are using social media and you can watch in social media a lot of places which have been shelled. And, a lot of Telegram channels are absolutely they are incognito, yes? You are not aware who is the owner, who are the journalists of these of this TV channel. And there are quite big and smaller TV channels. And in case of big Telegram channels and social media, I think the government is trying to communicate at least and to regulate the issue formally or informally. But you know the rules, there are restrictions for publishing pictures after the sharing. And it doesn't matter whether are you a journalist or a private person, it doesn't matter.
Maybe the last question I'd like to ask all of you, which seems to me to be one of the fundamental questions of this war and journalism. And this is a question about objectivity, about neutrality. Why is this important? Because before being a journalist, we Ukrainians, we are citizens, so we are not objective in a way. So yeah, for us, it's important. It's a job. It's a profession. It's a way how we earn money. But at the same time, what is maybe the dearest will for all of us is the victory. So we are not objective in a way sometimes could be. And I'd like each of you to make a point on this point of objectivity. Could we be really objective being a journalist during the war?
Stas Kozliuk.
That's the story. When I read a lot of articles from foreigners, I saw this checkbox objectivity. Because they give, for example, the same numbers of characters in the same, or for example, the same time on a video for equalizing both sides. But the story is that you try to equalize the truth and the propaganda. Because you always have to remember, when you try to make interview, like some famous United States media, when you try to make some interview, for example, with Oleg Tsaryov, you have to understand that that guy will give you information that, it's information not from Oleg Tsaryov. That's information from the Kremlin, and you have to understand it. And if you're making the story like this, you have to give the context, and you always have to check the words of your speakers, but you cannot give only quotes of Tsaryov, for example, or I don't know. I have the story. I worked with some TV channel and they want to make the live stream of self-proclaimed republics leaders. And I try to explain them that, for example, you don't give the live stream of head of Al-Qaeda because that guy is a terrorist. He's a criminal. And that's why you cannot give the live stream of that guy, is because you have to give the context and you have to give the checks of his words. That's the one story. And another story that, for example, a lot of foreigner journalists asked me about the war crimes from both sides, for example, like torturing of prisoners of war. And you're trying to explain that, yeah, sure, you can make the stories about Ukrainians and Russian soldiers, but the story is that you try to equalize and tell that Ukrainians making the same things like Russians, but the story is about the system. For example, if we're talking about war crimes of Russian soldiers, is it system or not? If you try to talking about crimes of Ukrainian soldiers, is it system or not? And what the results of these war crimes and, investigations, some jails or whatever. And it's the huge, complicated story, and you have to remember it. And if you're doing job on this way, yeah, sure, you can be objective.
Roman Golovenko.
I would like to say that it is quite a complicated question because for the first, there is a problem of perception, and Ukrainian journalists, I think, in many cases are perceived as that not as a neutral, like Russians, because they are citizens of their countries. And this is the type of human nature and perception. We are not able to do something with it, but we should try. And talking about the balance, I think the problem may be solved with the experts, independent, real experts, to comment one position and the other. But the practical problem is to find such an expert. And also objectivity is not limited to balance. It's also the question to whether to publish some information or not. And today it may be, you may think that you are comparing pros and cons, and pros looks bigger right now, yes. But after the half a year later, you may see that the situation have changed significantly, and cons are bigger, and maybe it was better to publish or not to publish such information. And it's a big dilemma, and I think it's not the question to a single journalist. This problem should be communicated and discussed in the editorial offices. You have no time to discuss, but it should be. I think it should be, because we are losing quality.
After this discussion, the audience takes the opportunity to ask questions.
Hi, good evening. My name is Serhiy Hrytsenko, and I'm here in the capacity as a media analyst and information resilience expert. I personally believe, honestly, that supporting journalism, high-quality journalism, and promoting fact-based, verified information about Russian aggression is really a key condition for ensuring Ukraine's victory in this war, which affects democracies worldwide. But I would like to use the opportunity of having this panel. What do we do more, in your opinion, to counter Western journalism who come to Ukraine and report from Russian sides? Can we call them journalists? And I can quote a number of episodes that our media community exposed, most recently from France. There is a channel, I don't know how popular it is, Stephane, but it's called TF1.
This is the biggest French television.
Exact. And with my friend here, we're just checking. One of the episodes reached over 300,000 views. And the episode was about 7 minutes reporting from the other side, not mentioning that Russia is an aggressor, nothing about Ukrainians fighting for their country. On the contrary, a journalist was quoting Russian soldiers saying how prepared they are to withstand Ukrainian counteroffensive. We understand the reason why it was done. But I want to ask you, as professionals in this field, what do we need to do more to withstand this? Thank you.
Stephane Siohan.
What is a war? A war is a story of violence and pain in general, like all wars. For me, there are two problems in the questions that you're putting on the table right now. The first one is, I think that a lot of media haven't yet grabbed the essence of this war. I think, and I do agree with Professor Timothy Snyder, who was yesterday at the Pen Club, that this is a genocidal war. This war ticks all the boxes of a genocidal war. But only people like Timothy Snyder, who is an historian of the Shoah, can tell it, because media are absolutely not able to grab the dimension of this war, because there is a sort of Hitler-Godwin point. We haven't seen concentration camps. We haven't seen Auschwitz. This is a temporality of media. They are totally short-sighted. And they consider that this war is kind of similar to other conflicts which have been covered over the past 30 years. So a lot of journalists are applying the same methodology, the same grids of analysis to the war in Ukraine as to other wars which have happened. But sorry, this is not the same war as Karabakh. This is not the same war as Syria. This is not the same war as Yugoslavia. And in the media practice, there is a tendency to distantiate yourself from violence. But all the reporting looks alike. It looks a little bit the same. And I personally think that the coverage of this war will gain into quality if we will take into account emotions and subjectivity. And subjectivity is not the contrary of high professional standards. And I think that journalism shouldn't be afraid of emotions, of pains, of violence, of sharing deep emotions. I'm also very happy and I'm very proud that my newspaper, Libération, was one of the first one to take as a regular reporter Krystyna Berdińska, a famous Ukrainian reporter, because it's also a big taboo for European media to make Ukrainian journalists work. The standards of journalism are very high here. are very good. Why there are no Ukrainian voices in Western media? Because Ukrainian journalists would write the story in another way, because it's their place. And maybe we would have a different journalism, something more colorful, more emotional. And I don't think you can understand what's happening here if you don't share a little part of the emotions of the people who are living here. I think that, yes, it's possible to work in those places, but every media company who takes this responsibility should have a very strong ethical and professional reflections about how they are operating, about what is the outcome, how does the production looks like, does it fit to ethical standards, and also do you commit yourself with some people you shouldn't be working with.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Covering Ukraine. My name is Oksana Mamchenkova, and I'm the Kyiv-based coordinator for the Europe-Ukraine desk. Lyuba Gook edited, sound designed, and mixed this episode. The views expressed by the panelists are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the organization they work for, nor n-ost or the European Commission who funded this project. The podcast Covering Ukraine was created as a part of the Europe-Ukraine desk, a program that aims at building bridges between journalists from the EU and Ukrainian journalists. You can get in touch with us at eud@n-ost.org. It is in the description of the episode. Maybe consider telling a friend about this show if you liked it. We will come back soon. Until then, take care and thanks for listening.